Welcome to HueLike vlog. Today the book we have is this, of Nawabs and Nightingales, written by Moosa Raza. This book is written by Moosa Raza, who was born in a small village of Tamil Nadu. He was a gold medalist from the University of Madras. He joined the Indian Administrative Service in 1960 and spent most of his career working in Gujarat. He later on became the Chief Secretary in the state of Jammu and Kashmir in 1990s. He is also a recipient of Padma Bhushan in 2010. This book of Nawabs and Nightingales is a collection of 15 stories from his life when he was posted in the districts. This is not his autobiography, as he has written his autobiography published in January 2023 by the name of Giants and Windmills. I will discuss two stories from the book. Both these stories are very interesting. The Floods of Surat. In the 1960s, the author was posted as District Collector of Surat. This story is about major challenges that the author faced as the administrative head of the district. He has written this story in a very interesting manner, and it contains many aspects of administration that need to be connected and understood. As we know, Surat is the largest market of diamond polishing, cutting and crafting in the world. Tapti River flows through Surat. Recurrent flooding happened in Surat with the Tapti River flowing through it. The weather prediction mechanism was not developed, and the work of administration was to make people living in the lower areas move to safer places. However, people were not much worried and would even return to their low area houses, and many business people saw the few days of flooding as a holiday from business and fun. At that time, the Ukai Dam had not been constructed. The dam came into existence in the 1970s. So in the year 1968, the district saw the worst kind of flooding. Most single-storied houses went completely underwater. And when Surat was facing such floods, the other places of Gujarat were also underwater, with Narmada, Kim, Daman-Ganga overflowing. The consequence was that the district was completely cut off from other places. The only communication challenge available was the wireless, but that was hardly useful as there could be no movement of vehicles. More than 100 people died in the district. The city remained under deep water for 3 days. Some areas submerged even up to 14 feet of water. When the flood receded, it left behind silt and mud of depth of 2 to 3 feet. Obviously, this also meant that there was no electricity. In such a situation, the superintendent of police of the district, after a meeting in the early hours, left for home, was alone in the jeep driving. He noticed that there was light in one of the popular bakeries of the city. He stopped the jeep and went towards the bakery and saw half a dozen people with flashlights breaking open almirahs and searching for loot. Just imagine the SP standing there and this group of thieves at front. Both recognized each other as those thieves were thugs well connected with local politicians. The SP, in the most dramatic filmy manner, announced that all of them were under arrest. The looters, like the villain Gabbar Singh, laughed, and as the SP was no Amitabh Bachchan, the looters came and slapped and manhandled the SP and threw him out. The SP thought of all possibilities, and having only a few years to retirement, preferred to keep mum on the incident. But would the goons stop bragging about what they did? So all these happenings reached the collector's ear. While the author was busy in relief measures and meeting NGOs for distributing food packets of puris and dry lentils, he had to think if this news of attack on the SP circulates and no action taken, then the consequence would be that other people will indulge in theft and looting, and the general population will get the message that the police is ineffective and the law and order situation would deteriorate. Now, when the city was underwater, one consequence was that all the banks and the vaults had gone underwater and the notes had become wet and soggy and couldn't be used. Now, as to law and order, the author ordered immediate arrest of the gang that had beaten up the SP. The news that the most powerful mafia gang of the city had been arrested served its purpose and there was no further theft attempted. Meanwhile, when the water receded and the markets reopened, people didn't have money. Also, poor people whose everything had been washed away in the flood needed to be provided with money so that they could buy some provisions. People who had bank accounts started to write checks to withdraw money from the bank. Bank officers, having no option, approached the author to issue notification ordering all banks to remain closed until sufficient cash is brought in from outside. This was because if they didn't issue cash, then they became liable under the Negotiable Instruments Act. On the other hand, in the absence of paper money, all business was coming to a halt. Even the state government could not help the district as supplying money with use of helicopter would require some more days. Food materials had been released from the godowns, but if people didn't have money, they couldn't buy food and come to streets that would lead to a law and order situation. Given this situation, the author decided to print money. Not a few hundred, not a few thousand, but amounting to 1 crore rupees in denomination of 2, 5, 10 and 100 rupees, and each note was personally signed by the author. Out of these, 80 lakh rupees was issued. You can imagine the value of 80 lakh rupees in 1968. The author didn't call it currency, but called it slips. But from definitions of economics, they were de facto currency. Each slip had the text, say if it was a 5 rupee note, it said this document entitles the bearer to buy goods worth 5 rupees. All concerned are advised to honor it to that value. It will be replaced by regular currency on presentation at specified offices and before a notified date. The supply of notes from the government took time. If we see from the position of a district collector, this was a dangerous experiment. Besides all currency laws having been broken, he was also worried if unscrupulous people would counterfeit the slip. Eventually, when the slips were replaced by regular currency, the amount of slips received was less than the 80 lakh rupees that were issued. The author had handled the crisis situation successfully. Later on, the author received a protest letter from the RBI wanting an explanation as to how he had usurped the powers of RBI. In his reply, after explaining the situation, he ended by saying that if he faced a similar situation again, he would repeat it again. The next story is equally interesting, so stay tuned. Shyamal of Padhars. This is a very beautiful story and shows how fortune favors the brave. Sometimes, when it seems that fate has pushed us into a place of disadvantage, in reality, fate is preparing us to move towards a better direction. And if we take action, we are sure to emerge with fortune. Padhars are a tribal community living on the shores of Nal Sarovar Lake, which is a prime tourist attraction of Gujarat. Migratory birds fly to this lake from far-off lands like Siberia, Scandinavia, Greenland, etc. The Padhars have their own distinct culture, and a large number of them lived in a village called Ranagar. Now, this village is close to the marshes and is therefore home to millions of mosquitoes of large size. The author uses the term Maharaja size for the mosquitoes. The author once decided to visit Ranagar, and along with him went the ex-ruler of Chinchli, who had come with his daughter Pushpa, who was in her late teens. She was a peppy girl and a pampered girl. Once in the Ranagar area, she was even enjoying the mosquito bites, while the camping party was running short of mosquito repellents. At that moment, Shyamal makes his dramatic appearance. He is handsome in appearance, has blue eyes, and brings mosquito nets with him. Shyamal seems to be well versed with the area and the movements of the migratory birds, and acted as a guide to the camping party. It is obvious to the author that Pushpa is smitten with Shyamal, but then there was a wide gap in social status between the two. While Pushpa was convent educated and belonged to a high class family, Shyamal made a living out of catching fish and birds. Many years later, the author had the opportunity to visit Singapore. As it was his first visit, he asked if there could be someone who could show him around, and a friend connected him to one Mr. S. Kumar, who was a prosperous importer and exporter, and also owned rubber plantations in Malaysia. When the author landed in Singapore, a handsome person introduced himself as S. Kumar. The author was perplexed, as it seemed he had seen the guy earlier, but he couldn't remember where, so he asked if they had met before. This guy, Shyam Kumar, was the same Shyamal from Ranagar village. Later on, he invited the author for dinner. The author was astonished to see that Pushpa was his wife. So how did all this happen? Shyamal knew only fishing. He landed a job in Bombay with a trawler, the boats that do deep sea fishing. He was not happy, so he moved to Rangoon but couldn't find a job. There, he came in contact with some immigrants, and 5 of them entered into a partnership and got land in Malaysia. That time, Malaysia was encouraging plantation of rubber trees in open lands, but that area happened to be heavily infested with mosquitoes. One by one, his partners died. Shyamal lived. Here, it's worth telling, as the author writes in the book, that the Padhars, because of their long exposure to the mosquitoes, have become immune and they don't get malaria. So he was left the sole owner of the rubber plantation. He then shifted to Singapore to start his export and import business, and also a plantation in Borneo. As to Pushpa, she had been married to an Air India executive, but the marriage ended in a divorce. Her father had also died. When Shyamal returned from Malaysia after making millions, he found her living alone in her ancestral palace. They married and lived happily in Singapore. Do read this book, as this has awesome real life stories and is a glimpse into not just the historical influences in Gujarat, but also the intricacies of life that the author saw in the first 12 years of his work life as an IAS officer in the districts of Gujarat. Thank you for watching this presentation.